Now, is it also true that the ESA has the capacity to restore habitat? And why is that absolutely critical to both recovery and management?
Well, certainly the Endangered Species Act speaks to habitat. Its aim is to preserve these species and the habitats upon which they depend. And at the end of the day, you might recall in the recent past, there was a presidential campaign, and I forget, it might have been President Clinton, as when he was candidate Clinton, said, "It's the economy, stupid." Well, for many endangered species, you can simply say it's the habitat, stupid, because they are dependent upon particular habitats, or they simply don't make it. And a classic example would be the black-footed ferret, a very narrow ecological specialist. Black-footed ferrets, if you were going to design an endangered species, you would design a black-footed ferret. They're pretty small, and they live on things principally bigger than themselves. That's a tough way to make a living, killing stuff bigger than you are. They live underground, and yet if you look at a black-footed ferret, Tom, if you had a black-footed ferret in your hand right now, and you said, "Gee whiz, this guy lives underground nearly all the time. It's a fossorial mammal. It lives underground nearly all the time." You think, well, it's got to be able to dig. It has the most modest little feet you can imagine. And its nails are really modest little nails. And you think there's no way that foot, equipped with those nails, could dig much of a hole. You know, you're right. They don't dig. They live underground, and yet they don't dig. And they don't dig, in large part, they don't dig in any real functional way, because they simply use holes created by prairie dogs. So not only do they have to prey on prairie dogs, they're a specialist. They live, their food is nearly exclusively prairie dogs, and they become really good at killing prairie dogs. And I can explain how they do that in a minute. A thing bigger than themselves, but they live in the holes that are created by prairie dogs, and prairie dogs are very good diggers. You look at a prairie dog's foot, and it's a real strong foot that can grab the dirt and move it well. It's got heavy nails for its size, and it's a good digger. If you're going to design an endangered species, you design a black-footed ferret. So you can't restore black-footed ferrets without restoring, first, its habitat. And for the black-footed ferret, the habitat that it needs is a prairie dog colony. And for many other species, it's exactly the same. You struggle to do well by the spotted owl without forests in the western U.S. that have a certain set of characteristics. You struggle to restore the Aplamata falcon without grasslands that have certain characteristics that support the right kind of prey. At the other end of the spectrum, away from these ecological specialists like black-footed ferrets, at the other end of the spectrum, you bump into the ecological generalists, those species that can do well just about anywhere if some basic needs are met. And the greatest ecological generalist is the gray wolf. For heaven's sakes, Tom, historically, the gray wolf occurred everywhere. It occupied every habitat of the United States. You could find gray wolves in grasslands. You could find gray wolves in forests. You could find gray wolves in deserts. You could find gray wolves in swamps. They occupied this country from coast to coast, east to west, and border to border, north to south. They were everywhere. All the gray wolf needs is something to kill that's bigger than itself. And the functional, the important ecological role that the gray wolf plays is that it typically it subsists on things bigger than itself. If you want to know a fundamental ecological difference between gray wolves and coyotes, for example, and you might think, my gosh, they look a lot the same. One's a bit bigger than the other, but other than that, they look a lot the same. Maybe they do about the same things in the woods. Well, that's not the case. The gray wolf is very much designed physically and emotionally through its social ecology, how it interacts with other gray wolves, to kill things bigger than itself: white-tailed deer, mule deer, elk, bison, etc. The coyote, through its physical characteristics and its social tendencies, is designed to kill things smaller than itself. a rabbit and a rodent, for example. Now that doesn't mean that these tendencies aren't violated sometimes. No self-respecting gray wolf is going to pass up a rabbit if he can catch and kill the rabbit. That's a nice, easy meal sometimes. And no self-respecting coyote is going to walk away from a white-tailed deer that is killable. But on average, coyotes live on things smaller than themselves, and gray wolves live on things bigger than themselves. If the gray wolf has access to something bigger than itself, so the pack can exist, so the social ecology of the gray wolf can manifest itself, because they're killing something that provides for the needs of many. You can crowd a lot of gray wolves around an elk, for example. Then the gray wolf does just fine. He doesn't give a hoot whether he's standing in a forest or standing in a grassland. And so in the case of the gray wolf, largely all the habitat restoration work that you need to do really is based on the social landscape, how much people are willing to tolerate. And we can imagine a biological carrying capacity of the forests of northern Minnesota. There's so many white-tailed deer, there's so many moose, and those so many deer and moose will support so many gray wolves. But for gray wolves, back to one of your earlier questions about interactions with humans, because gray wolves can frustrate people, there's also a social aspect to any area's capacity to support gray wolves. So with that species, a great ecological generalist, we have to think about biological carrying capacity, how many moose, for example. We also have to think about social carrying capacity, and that is simply how many gray wolves will people support before they blow a gasket and say, gee whiz, we need a massive control program because there are simply too many gray wolves.
Well, isn't that where the real rub is right now in moving from the whole idea of being on the list to being in state management, how that is done?
Yes. It's all about numbers. It's all about numbers and distribution. I think when you take a hard look at the Endangered Species Act, and we already discussed this notion of range and significant portion, I think that it's very clear, common sense interpretation. Significant portion of range means both how common are they across a particular area. That's the spatial aspect of significance. And then there's the ecological aspect too. Are there enough gray wolves so they're filling an important ecological role? Is the habitat, is the area made more ecologically complete because of the gray wolf's presence? One gray wolf killing moose in Minnesota is not the same ecological impact, and it doesn't generate the same ecological benefits as 100 gray wolves killing moose in Minnesota. So there clearly is a spatial and ecological component, and what people debate is how many gray wolves over what area. And some think there's not enough gray wolves over a big enough area. They want more. And other people think there's plenty of gray wolves over too big of an area. We need fewer. Well, I think in the northern Rocky Mountains, the answer is pretty much what we've got on the ground today. 3 states principally involved, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, and about 1,500 to 2,000 gray wolves that occupy a big chunk of those 3 states. And I'm willing as a biologist to define occupation very liberally. I don't have to have an area occupied only where a gray wolf is standing. I can imagine the occupation extends over a much, much bigger area. And I think that largely you've got it right in the Great Lakes states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan. I think there's probably 3,000 or more gray wolves in those 3 states that occupy a big part of the 3 states. I think that in the Great Lakes states, and I think in the northern Rocky Mountains, the wolf population is going to persist very much on its own. And so you can make some rather certain claims about what we're likely to see in the future. I think if you could imagine what does northern Minnesota look like 100 years from now, or northern Wisconsin, or northern Michigan, and 100 years from now you're going to see gray wolves doing what gray wolves do, peeing on bushes and howling at the moon and killing deer. And that's good. And so you asked me what's sufficient. I think the gray wolves are sufficiently secure in the Great Lakes states to be removed from the list of threatened and endangered species under the Endangered Species Act. And I think the gray wolves in the northern Rocky Mountains are sufficiently secure to be removed from the list of threatened and endangered species. Elsewhere, they're still very, very endangered in the Southwest. that gray wolf that occupies that Arizona, New Mexico, southern half of Utah, southern half of Colorado, that country has not been subjected to an effective recovery program. Gray wolves there, it continued to be considered endangered. There's not been sufficient recovery work done in the Pacific Northwest. Gray wolves should remain endangered there. And I don't believe sufficient recovery work has been done in the Northeast. Gray wolves need to be considered endangered there.